The presence of thermite has been covered by many researchers, and it's commonly assumed that its purpose was to assist in the demolition process. But René believed that the real purpose of the thermite was to cremate the bodies so they couldn't be found. Why would any office building have thermite in the basement unless it was there to actually melt the ends of the existing steel beams to prove that the fires melted them? It would also turn the rubble into a super hot oven, which would carbonize the crushed and ground up flesh of the victims, leaving no bodies and few bones to be recovered. Since then, further evidence has come to light that a substance labelled superthermite or nanothermite was present in the demolition rubble. In 2009, a team of scientists from diverse backgrounds studied the dust from the World Trade Center site and discovered that it contained microscopic chips of red and grey material. Further analysis showed these to be fine layers of primarily iron oxide and aluminium, the prime ingredients for producing thermite. It was found that these chips were able to be ignited at temperatures as low as 430 degrees centigrade, at which point they reacted explosively. These reactions also left behind microscopic spheres that were very similar, both in terms of size and composition, to what is produced by burning commercial thermite. On that note, it should be pointed out that in the beginning, the official explanation was that the jet fuel fire had melted the steel in the building. This was reported by the BBC on September 13, 2001. But as the fires raged in the towers, driven by aviation fuel, the steel cores in the building would have eventually reached 800 degrees Celsius, hot enough to start buckling and collapsing. The protective concrete cladding on the cores would have been no permanent defense in these extraordinary circumstances, keeping the intense heat at bay for only a limited time span. It was the fire that killed the buildings. There's nothing on Earth that could survive those temperatures with that amount of fuel burning, said structural engineer Chris Wise. The columns would have melted, the floors would have melted, and eventually they would have collapsed, one on top of each other. The building's construction manager, Hyman Brown, agreed nothing could have survived from the inferno. The buildings would have stood had a plane or force caused by a plane smashed into it, he said. But steel melts, and 24,000 gallons of aviation fluid melted the steel. Nothing is designed or would be designed to withstand that fire. Once the steel frame on one floor had melted, it collapsed downward, inflicting massive forces on the already weakened floor below. Even the diagram they show reads, "Fire reaches 800 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt the steel floor supports." However, when it was pointed out that 800 degrees Celsius is well below the melting point of steel, the story changed from "the fires melted the steel" to "the fires weakened the steel."
When steel is bare, when it heats up, it gets weaker. It's not that it melts in a fire. In fact, normal fires are not hot enough to melt steel. Even if you were, for example, to use an unusual fuel like kerosene, you cannot achieve temperatures hot enough to melt steel. But what happens is it starts to lose its strength. And as it loses its strength, it starts to sag. It becomes softer and sags and can no longer support the load.
Even if so, there are still some major problems with this story. Never prior to or since 9/11 has there been an incident in which a high-rise steel building collapsed due to fire.
In over 20 years, I have not seen, until recently, a protected steel structure that has collapsed in a fire.
One Meridian Plaza, a 38-story building in Philadelphia, burned for 19 hours over the 26th and 30th floor. Even though the damage to the building was beyond repair, the building itself did not collapse. Granted, page 11 of FEMA's report on this fire does state that firefighters were told to stand down due to fears of a pancake collapse, but only after 11 hours into the fire, not less than 2 hours as was the case with the Twin Towers. And despite this concern, One Meridian Plaza remained standing. Now you're probably saying, but that's just the fire damage. What if an aeroplane hit it? It's a moot point, because the Trade Center was designed to withstand multiple impacts of a Boeing 707.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does nothing to the screen netting.
The Windsor building in Madrid burned like a torch for nearly 24 hours. Again, though the damage was beyond repair, and although the top 10 floors did give away, the tower did not collapse. 9/11 propagandists, like Mark Aradian, have claimed that the Windsor building survived because it had a concrete core holding it up. Well, guess what? So did the World Trade Center, albeit a steel-reinforced concrete core. You can't have it both ways. Whilst watching the TV, René noticed that while the North Tower collapse was shown over and over that day, the South Tower was only shown once, at least on the networks he was watching. I watched the North Tower collapse at least 100 times that day in September, and never once was the South Tower shown again.
It was absolutely horrifying. There was a roar, and then the building just began to disappear as it sort of imploded, I think.
This picture shows the South Tower leaning at an angle and about to come down. Many researchers assume that this portion crumbled as it fell. But René found this picture of the South Tower on the ground. This shows the upper portion was not pulverized but flattened.
As survivors walked around dazed, no one could be sure how many did not escape before the towers collapsed. Some estimate as many as 20,000 could still have been inside.
Even the mayor of New York City at the time, Rudy Giuliani, was quoted to putting the 9/11 death toll much higher than officially stated. "There is no moral equivalent for this attack," Giuliani said. "The people who did it lost any right for justification when they slaughtered 5,000, 6,000 innocent people." René saw Giuliani state this exact same estimate on the television networks at the time.
The whole South Tower toppled. He's pointing at it and saying there's 6,000 people trapped in there, but we're going to get them all out. That's the one that puts the lie to the whole goddamn thing. That's 6,000 bodies that didn't get cremated by the goddamn thermite, that fell free of it, and all they did was get flattened out, not busted up in little pieces or nothing. Where did those 6,000 bodies go? You know, you can drop a guy from the top of the atmosphere, he hits concrete, he flattens out, he don't come apart. You check on it with the skydivers if you think I'm kidding you. Not one body's ever been found to break apart from a fall. They're nice and flat, but they didn't break apart.
That Secretary Rumsfeld and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Hugh Shelton held a news conference in the Pentagon, at the opposite end of the building, but nevertheless in the Pentagon, even as this devastated portion here continued to burn. And during that news conference, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Hugh Shelton issued a pledge that America would retaliate against those responsible. And I can tell you that for some time, that the U.S. military has always had a variety of contingency plans in place to attack various terrorist targets. In this case, the prime suspect, Osama bin Laden.
Another thing that René noted was that the media quickly drew their conclusions over who was responsible. From the first minutes of coverage, bin Laden was the only suspect mentioned on the TV stations. By noon, he was indicted, tried, and convicted by the media. When Afghanistan asked for proof of his connections to this crime, they were rebuffed and then attacked. 7 months later, the FBI admitted that it has zero proof. Now, it is not even a question of should we pounce on Iraq, but when? Doesn't World War III lie in that general direction?
The Taliban's ambassador to Pakistan has also condemned the attacks. The Taliban has given shelter to Osama bin Laden, but Abdul Salam Ziaf said he didn't believe bin Laden could be responsible.
We do not allow Osama bin Laden to use the soil of Afghanistan against any country. We have taken from him all means of communication, and he is not in contact with anyone.